It's the 21st of August in 2022. Hope everybody's doing good on this Sunday night. The first show of 5 each week. This starts on Sunday. It always takes me a moment to get up to cruising speed. So, it's a rather unique moment in history where they're using a nuclear power plant in Ukraine, the Russians, aka the World Economic Forum, as a human shield, so to speak. Which makes sense when you look at the history of how twisted the nuclear industry actually is. They should change the dictionary for stupid. It should say nuclear power plants and everybody in the nuclear industry. This organization at some point has to go. You realize that, right? You got to replace it with some kind of humans, I guess. They're owned by what's known as UN as 195 militaries. Eisenhower warned you about it. It's called the military-industrial complex. And George Bush Sr. called it a new world order.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order. A world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
And so once they grab the media, you can't have a conversation with most people because they are addicted to that stupidness. All right, so first off, how long did they extend my last video? When we finished, it was 2 hours and 51 minutes, 24 seconds. So you want to think of the 24 seconds because that's what's going to change. After 12 hours, the videos typically get longer, but we've seen them get shorter. So that's this video here. So it got 7 seconds longer. After 12 hours, my videos get longer. Exactly 12 hours. Daily News Hungary. Scary video. Radioactive cloud could reach Budapest from the captured Ukraine plant. It's the biggest in the EU. A frightening video how radioactive contaminants would reach even East Hungary, including Budapest, if a catastrophe happened at the Ukrainian nuclear power plant. The video of the Ukraine Institute created this model I'm going to show you, was retweeted by a Ukrainian embedded journalist. So it was on her Twitter feed. What it's supposed to depict is the radioactive fallout if they have a nuclear event releases, aka nuclear meltdown. So I captured it out of curiosity. And it's showing there's the date at the top of it of how long it takes, just a couple of days to make that plume. Now, Fukushima plume, that's a 20-day plume of radioactive fallout. So they downplayed the plume, right? Significantly. by claiming that's what it was going to look like. There's a twisted story where they're claiming Chernobyl's worse than a 200-ton reactor, mostly graphite, by the way, is worse than 4 720-ton reactors in Japan melting down. And they had decades of reactor cores, those 720-ton reactor cores. They have decades of them in 2 pools on the top of each of the reactors. They're gone. So that's 8 fuel pools and 4 reactor cores. The industry is, it's absolutely unequivocally out of control. Power company pays biggest fine ever of $330 billion. Power company. Now, they're talking about TEPCO, which was the owner of the Fukushima Daiichi plant, where they had multiple fuel pools and reactor buildings melt down, reactor cores. So the story shows up, and you can see the picture they're showing you. In the background is the fake Reactor 3 building. I'll show you what I mean by that. Just one moment. Here we go. This is the detonation of Reactor 3, 190-foot building. March the 15th, 2011. That's the fuel pool and reactor core falling down to the earth. And so they're showing you this picture here in the background where they claim it's a perfect fuel pool. But it obviously doesn't exist if you look at the evidence. Now, this picture is the first time in 11 years that I've seen a picture where you can actually see reactor 5 and 6 in the background. Wow. Just mind-blowing. Being sarcastic, but it is mind-blowing for a couple of other reasons, because there's no tanks in the picture and it's a recent picture. But they do show you this picture where you suggest there's the fuel pool's right up alongside of it. We've never seen, because there's, starting from the far corners, reactor 4, 3, 2, and 1, the remains of them, they're completely lost. And up there you can see reactor 5 and 6. For those of you who have bad sight, that's these 2 buildings right here. This is 5 and this is 6. Now, this was redacted, and the pump house and the stack were redacted in the original pictures that were released in January last year. There was 731, I believe. We've done a presentation on it. You can find it in my playlist. Nobody else has ever shown this public, those pictures I'm talking about. And so we counted the tanks. There's supposed to be 1,000 tanks. We counted 750. That's if you include those small tanks behind the reactor buildings, which are 4, 3, 2, and 1. And reactor, well, that's the cast building, and this is the common spent fuel pool right there, rather. And this was destroyed also with decades of reactor cores. They covered that up and reactor 6 up. And they omit the reactor 1, 2, and 3 kind of. They kind of retracted. We counted the tanks. We got, I can't remember, we being me, hundreds and hundreds of pictures of the site, of the tanks in particular. We've never seen a picture where they showed us 5 and 6 in the same picture in 11 years. Journalists are notorious for not allowed to carry a camera onto the site. If they want footage, they get it from the public relation firm of TEPCO's. I think it's stunning Now, the tanks were built to trick people into thinking that they built these containments you see around the tanks because in an earthquake, the empty tanks will actually tip over. And then how do they explain no spill? And I'll explain it to you. Please give me time. I'll explain to you what I mean by when I say empty tanks. If you fill the tanks up at 1.4, it's 1.4 million sieverts of just beta with their numbers, which means you can't build another tank there because there's so much radiation, gamma shines, X-rays, neutron bursts. And so let's go back to 2013. Mari Yamaguchi. She was used for the cover-up for many years. Whenever there's a cover-up, you'll see her name attached to it. So 1,000 tanks in 2013. 2014, Mari Yamaguchi, 1,200 tanks. 2017, 900 tanks. And try walking with both of your feet on the ground. There's steel plates they're walking on, by the way. You couldn't walk around these tanks if they were full. 2019, they got 1,000 tanks. 2021, they got 1,000 tanks. 2022, they got 1,000 tanks. They had 1,000 tanks in 2013 and 1,000 tanks in 2022. How many tanks did you fill up in the last 9 years? Okay, so they're actually burning huge amount of radioactive debris. They're shipping it all over the country and burning it in the incinerators, and that the ash is so radioactive they can't take it to the dump. By the way, the sewage, they can't get rid of the sewage because it's so radioactive throughout the country. And they can't get rid of the sediment from the water reclamation centers across the country because they're too radioactive. And so just one water reclamation center had produced 55,000 tons in just a couple of years of sediment that was too radioactive to get rid of. It's a very radioactive country, and by burning dirty bombs all around the country constantly, none of this makes any sense, right? Everything is just any of the things I just told you are true. It's a terribly polluted country. If all the things I told you are true, and why would I make this up, by the way? TEPCO failed to deliver and promised to install a fence to contain the contamination from leaking. A fence. A fence. With no, like, you got to have a bottom in it too for this to work. Just lose my mind sometimes. More than 2.5 years after the Daiichi nuclear disaster, instead of multiple nuclear power plants melting down, officials in Japan have now admitted in June the TEPCO promised to build a fence to block the radioactive water. Using the word leaking is the most bizarre statement imaginable. TEPCO asked the government not to announce that they had committed to construction of fences as it was going to cost $1 billion. Which is a hell of a lot cheaper than the ice wall. It took 260,000 people, they say, to build this. And then the money that was allocated for it, if you don't buy anything and just pay the 260,000 people $1,020 each, there's no money left over to build the ice wall. 260,000 people to build a 1 kilometer long ice wall rather than a real wall. Like I said, there's nothing about the story that makes any sense. It's not me. This is the story. They admit that the ice wall they promoted to prevent the groundwater from entering the buildings, mixing with the highly radioactive water, has failed to work as billed as technically incapable of blocking off the groundwater. It's incapable because there's no bottom in it. And why would you build an ice wall, for God's sake? It's every facet of the story is, how can we make it worse? Okay, let's do that. That makes sense. That actually makes sense, right? 2014, TEPCO says groundwater bypass operations not having an effect. They don't know when, if ever, the operation will have any tangible effects. TEPCO unable to bring contaminated water issues under control. There's parts of the site where they don't have control. It's too radioactive. The advanced liquid processing system is yet to function reliably. 2014. Okay, so this video, because it doesn't stop with this story, does it? This video is a time lapse. It's at 20 times the normal speed. I'm going to double that up on the software inside of the equipment that I'm using. So it's 40 times the normal speed. The emissions are coming from the melted reactor is tunneled down to the earth. They build them on a riverbed. The water still flows down there. And that's meant to cool it, but that floods straight directly out into the Pacific. All nuclear power plants have this oh shit plan built into it. And these emissions are lethal doses. You have to evacuate permanently this area. It will irradiate everything that it comes in contact with permanently. And I'm going to speed this up. That's 20 times speed. And I'll just move ahead and get to the emissions in a second. We're getting there. Now you can see emissions starting to come out. Now, what this means, though, is that's a lethal dose on site because it's pulsing energy known as a gamma shine, X-rays, and neutron bombardments. Some of the Geiger counters they had were maxed out 10 sieverts per hour, and which means this thing is thousands and thousands and thousands of sieverts. It's going to radiate all the infrastructure, all the roads. So this is why there's no homeless and destitute and victims of society in the countries, because they sacrificed them in this environment. This is not, TEPCO doesn't go there, nuclear academics don't go there, nuclear scientists don't go there, right? And so this is the remains reactor 3 to your left. That's the fuel pools at the very top of the buildings. They have decades of reactor cores because they don't have a repository anywhere in the world, let alone Japan. There's 6 reactor buildings. They all have 2 fuel pools. The reactor core is about 720 tons. Chernobyl was 200 tons. So originally, this is the original footage shortly after. They stripped that down with remote control cranes and the homeless and victims of society, nuclear academics, nuclear students, nuclear professors, nuclear universities, nuclear corporations are not going near Medusa, right? So this was a 190-foot building, and at the very top of the buildings was where the reactor cores and the fuel pools are. It doesn't exist. So they've done the same thing with Reactor 4 where they tricked everybody and deceived them. They pretend that, now they're pretending all that is normal. They're pretending everything I'm telling you is not real. These are the official pictures on top of that. So Reactor 4, there's nothing left. The infrastructure, the inventories were at the top of the buildings. So if you question the narrative, it was irresponsible rumors claim Fukushima spent fuel pools exploded. Well, they did. So what they done was built these stupid structures on top of these derelict, this wreckage, these there's a proper word for it. There's nothing left there. They built them structures there and claimed that everything was intact. That inside, it looked like this. In buildings that didn't exist anymore. Some more water leaks. 290,000 decays per cubic centimeter. So not microsievert or millisievert or sievert, but atomic decays per second, like my Geiger counter is counting as the physical pulses. 22 liters had 6.3 billion becquerels of radioactivity leaked. So when you start counting in centimeters, that's madness, okay? They're only acknowledging one emission, one type of emission. So you got gammas, alphas, betas, neutrons, but also that creates X-rays because they don't mingle together. And 286 million decays per liter. It's actually much worse than that, but that's just the one they're talking about. So the Tonga volcano eruption reached 90 meters. 90 meters is 300 feet. I can't remember. I thought I had it here for you. So anywhere there's nuclear power plants or holding sites or installations where there's volcanoes or even communities, of course. Now, the earthquake in Japan reached 133 feet. It was traveling at 700 kilometers per hour. So when he says 9 times taller than 2011 Japanese tsunami, it wasn't. Japanese tsunami was up to 140 feet. I don't know, I'm just splitting hairs, but it's, that stuff is important to me anyway. So by comparison, the largest tsunami wave due to earthquakes before the Tonga were the Tohoku earthquake 2011 and the Chilean earthquake that was reaching 10 meters high initial heights. But the Tohoku earthquake tsunami reached 133 feet and up to 10 kilometers inland. It actually went farther than that, but it's Wikipedia. Of course, Wikipedia will cut your throat in a heartbeat. So there was an atmospheric pressure circled the planet many times from the volcano in Tonga, which, by the way, was hit hard by Fukushima radioactive fallout. Anyway, war in Ukraine has dramatically revived global nuclear industry. So, military using a nuclear power plant as a human shield has made everybody happy, and everybody wants more nuclear power. That's the craziness of the industry. This is what they actually done, right? So in February, there's a lot of people asking, what's going on. And there was a lot of fear, and there was a lot of headlines. There was a lot of headlines. Hello there. Hey.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, I'm good. You're going live, whether you like it or not. But
All right. Anyways, I got a chance to start up and run my spectrometer there for a little bit.
okay, hang on there. So for folks who don't know, what this gentleman does is he checks the rainwater quite a lot over the years, and other items, groceries, stuff like that, or seaweed and stuff like that, the grocery shops, and have found extraordinary numbers of americium and cesium. And you got a bit of a report for us tonight by chance?
Yeah, I do. We had a little bit of rain here, so I ran the instrument, and I got 1,149 counts of americium and cesium. That's the first time I've ever had them come out exactly the same, which was interesting.
So that was 2,800. 2,800
yeah, 1,100. Yep, 1,149
each.
Yeah. Now, I got them higher or lower in the past. You know, it can be anywhere.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, that's right. Well, you've called in a lot over the years.
Yeah.
And so that's all you were checking for, though, was those two. Is that right?
What's that?
So that's the only two. Just so people understand what's going on, that's the only two you were checking for, right?
That's the only two. Yeah, I figured those two tell the whole story.
So tell people what the story is, because they heard it from me lots. And I scare them.
The story is, you know, I've been running these instruments since 2015. You know, Fukushima went up in 2011, and I couldn't find anybody I thought I was getting an honest appraisal from. You know, I went all over YouTube and all over the internet, and I was looking for it, and then one day when I heard, I think it was Lauren Murray, she says, yeah, the cores went into the water table on the Pacific, and that's when it sunk in. I figured there could be a problem, but that's when it really sunk in, and then I started running the tests myself so I could, you know the truth. And I got the truth.
And the truth is ugly as sin, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's I haven't seen anybody with these instruments that have positive ID, you know, the isotopes. You know, the industry has always said, oh, it's just natural radium or whatever, you know, to snow people over. Because people are finding things on their Geiger counters. Now, if anybody has them in your audience, remember that unshielding, you can pick things up with a Geiger counter. I pick it up, you know, after you unshield it. Just take a paper towel and wipe it off the hood of your car. I guess when it goes across the metal, the stuff starts flying out of it. But this stuff, it bonds in the rain or food, water, whatever, and you may not pick it up with any instrument.
That's right, yeah.
So,
well, you're not picking up plutonium with your Geiger counter. Or Korean, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyways, I managed to check a couple of food things. You know, some frozen lasagna. You know, I don't want to say the brands, obviously, but I got, you know, like 33 counts per minute per, like, liter of it. And, you know, the rain was by the liter as well.
Right.
Now, I've had lasagna go off a lot higher than that.
Yeah, that's right.
Hundreds
yeah.
in the past. Now, kale, you know, I got like 250 of the americium and another 150 of the cesium.
Do you realize how many views you would actually get if you started doing a comparison of different brands? Counts per minute? And just play real innocent, right? Well, I got 300 counts there, which is, I've seen it worse. And
Well, you're eating every day. There's no avoiding it. I mean, some things I haven't been able to pick it up in, but that doesn't mean it's not there.
look, folks, but generally, if you can find one, you can extrapolate that there's this many this ones, this many that ones. There's a ratio, right? And that's how they typically do it. And so, like when you find americium, you're going to get close to the same in cesium, right? That you see it all the time, right?
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
It's rare I don't find both. If I find one or the other.
Yeah, I think you did report it just one time, maybe, or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There was a time,
few
yeah.
I could go back,
That's a good point.
through the records and all that. But the other thing, too, is, like, if some stuff is grown in a greenhouse, I would suspect it would be a lot less. Like, if they're watering it with well water.
Right, yeah. No, it would be, yeah.
Exposed in a greenhouse.
That was big.
Compared to being...
There's still, you can't keep the airborne out, but there should be a significant difference, right? If you got clean soil, deep soil. This stuff gets pretty deep, right? The roots will carry it deep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because, most likely it hasn't sunken too many inches into the dirt yet. So if you got deep root, like trees and fruit and stuff.
They carry it, yeah. Well, they carry it to the tips too, right? And you don't see the spider webs setting up on the trees anymore. They're setting up on houses and buildings and trucks and cars, but not on trees or bushes, right? Because it's sucking up the radiation. That's what I'm seeing now a lot. It's really, you can't find them in the trees or the woods, in the bushes. Yeah. You'll find them on rocks.
I'm not seeing a lot of the things. I've seen my whole life. Is there anything conclusive out of, like, Ukraine where they say they're, like, shelling the nuclear plant over there? I'm skeptical of that, obviously. I don't think one side or the other.
I'm covering some of it. Yeah, I'm covering quite a bit of it tonight, but
okay, all right.
I haven't gotten nothing credible, and they're not going to set off the sirens if they have a release anyway, right? I don't think they will anyway.
Yeah, I would suspect.
They're in a war zone, right? The plant's not supposed to be running. There's too many things can go wrong.
Oh, really? Oh, that's good.
Like, no, I'm just saying there's two running, but they shouldn't be running, right?
No, they shouldn't be. No, I mean, everyone on the planet should be shut down.
Yeah, but the ones in the war zone, they should have. It's a war zone. It's stupid to keep them open in a war zone.
Well,
like, it's crazy. Because they're arming the locals, right? They're not military trained. They're giving them one-shot disposable javelins and everything else from different NATO countries. They're sending them over there. I'm going to cover that up later, but I'm glad you called in.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah, I don't know anybody there still. The people,
right?
I did know they managed to get out of there.
Right, because you talked about that before.
Yeah.
So you never heard nothing about releases, have you?
No.
I haven't.
And I was thinking I'd see them, this past few days I've been running this instrument.
Right, yeah.
But the different type of clouds,
if they have an event, you're going to come in really handy. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to be one of the few people out there, right?
Yeah.
That, it's not like I can't trust Arnie Gunnarsson or Helen Caldercott or Chris Busby.
No. I'm not tied to anything or anybody. I'm all on my own.
Yeah, same as me. Yeah. Right.
So I think there's no influence one way or the other. If there was nothing there, I'd say, hey, great, there's nothing there. But there's something there. There's something all over.
Well, the numbers you've been reporting for the last number of years are pretty horrific numbers. So, in the thousands, like, my goodness.
There's a rain that was like 14,000 pounds between the two.
Yeah.
Between the two isotopes.
That's
You know,
after,
I've
that
had
was
others
after
over
an earthquake,
10,000.
yeah, in Japan.
Yeah, on average, they can go anywhere from 100 to 2,000, 5,000, 10,000, whatever. It's, it's different every time.
That's right.
So, the reason I like to periodically run it, I'm not going to sit there and hope this goes away, because I don't think it's ever going away. It's a constant feed.
Yeah, no,
So,
it's been going on for so long too, right? For 80 years.
yeah.
And
I was
okay,
I
my
was
friend.
looking on Facebook there, and people were putting in their pictures of the monarch caterpillars,
Right?
and they said, "Hey, these were different colors. Hey, these had no antennas."
Wow.
Stuff like that. So I suspect, the first suspect would be they're eating all the.
They're pollinators, right?
Mutating.
They're pollinators. So the pollinators are getting hit hard by the radioactive fallout because the radioactive pollen, right? They can't escape it. That's part of their diet.
Oh,
and
yeah.
They bioaccumulate it in the nest, right? And so it's pulsing huge energy in those areas. Because the plants suck it up. This way you're not seeing the spiders tying on to the plants no more. It's bizarre. Okay, anything else you'd like to throw out there before we jump back into the
No,
program?
that should do it. I forgot to text you those pictures of them.
That's right, yeah.
So, so just people could see what this looks like.
Right, yeah. No, good point, actually. Well, it's during my Texas.
Yep.
I'll zip through them. I'm sure of it. I'll find it. I got it there somewhere anyway. Okay. God bless.
Have a good one.
Yeah, you too, man.
Okay,
Thank you. Yeah, bye-bye. So anybody want to call in? 709-589-4406. 709-589-4406. Let's keep it rolling. Hope everybody's doing good. How's everybody doing? We ordered in the idler control valve on Friday. That should be in by September the 6th. I'll show you that at the end of the show. And the parts came in for the truck. I got a video of that disaster from the weekend. I'm still busted up. Is nuclear industry capable of dumping radioactive water and faking Fukushima nuclear holding tanks? And 93% of the participants are adamant that the nuclear industry is just a degenerate scumbag. I'm shocked. I'm totally shocked. Yeah, thanks, Gar. Right, Dana. Asana. Good point. Yeah, that's scary numbers. Holy cow. Hi, everybody. I hope everybody's doing good. Let's keep her real here and moving. They shouldn't have a nuclear power plant open in a war zone. Russia's going to pipe the electricity into their in the Crimea, which they captured a couple of years ago, right? So war in Ukraine has dramatically revived the global nuclear industry. But the same war can kill it too. So the person that got his name on it is capable of writing the story, but I doubt that they did. Typically, they're not capable of writing the story, and it's usually written by the lobbying groups. And it's rare for somebody going there looking to score points, right? It's usually very controlled, but a lobbying group writes it, and the media publishes and puts their author's name on it. That's how they get a paycheck. But the revival, this is ludicrous. You're talking about a nuclear power plant, they're threatening to blow it up and all kinds of stuff. And that somehow gave the world confidence in nuclear power. That's social engineering, see? That's how that works. The events at 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania in 1979, well, Santa Susana in 1959 that they hid away for 5 decades was equal to 460 3-mile islands melting down at the one time, worth of radiation released into the environment. But they'll talk about 3 Mile Island. Led to a movement in most parts of the world that forced the governments to abandon the development, not because they didn't abandon it because they wanted to, they only abandoned it because of pressure. This is what they're suggesting. And China and Russia was exceptions because dissent is not really tolerated over there. But the sharp rise in the oil prices, fossil fuels, following the war in Ukraine. Sharp rise in oil prices following the invasion. It's not a war. Well, it's NATO's war. This is NATO's war, but NATO's chicken shit, too afraid to go there. And so the NATO countries are supplying weapons. And if you look up NATO, NATO's 30 militaries. That's what it says, 30 militaries. It's the little pit bull for the United Nations, right? It's supposed to be, it was created as an opposition to the Soviet Union. So when the Soviet Union was dissolved, NATO was supposed to dissolve, but they had so much power they wouldn't give it up. And because evil works that way, and now they're so evil, they don't even know who they are anymore. Now they're just a thug. The sharp rise in oil prices following the war in Ukraine. So, like all the NATO countries, United Nations countries, inflicted inflation upon their countries by putting in an embargo against Russia to punish Russia for invading NATO was grooming them, Ukraine. But Ukraine is a nuclear wasteland, right? And this is the biggest producer of wheat on the planet. It's disgusting. To arrest global warming. So when someone tells you that, that's abnormal, okay? To say these words, this is structure. This is grammar as a weapon, basically. Demands for nuclear energy seem to be finding more and more supporters. And the supporters, everybody that tells the story is going to give you the same handful, right? They're going to tell you France gets 70% of their power, but over half France's fleet is actually shut down. 6 from corrosion. 6 of the other reactors are shut down from droughts. They're planning on building reactors, but there's endless droughts there year after year that can't even support the reactors that they got currently. In the aftermath of the Fukushima mishap, Germany's nuclear exit was so accelerated that as many as 7 nuclear power plants were closed down in one go in 2011. That's pretty impressive. The nuclear industry lost their minds, by the way, when that happened. And they've never stopped attacking Germany all day, every day, because, anything in a nuclear, I'm going to end up having to read it. And every day, just this barrage of people. For years and years and years, just this endless, brutal stream attacking Angela Merkel personally. And she's a quantum physicist. She's infinitely smarter than these journalists that are attacking her. That was pretty impressive, though. Close 7 plants in Germany in just the first year, which was the moral and ethical thing to do, by the way. Now only 3 of their, I think they had 38 plants or 36 plants in 2011. They only got 3 left. They're going to close them down December the 31st. However, that is not going to happen. It seems Germany is now undergoing a strong domestic debate about the necessity of keeping the reactors. Actually, no. Quite a lot of the media today is reporting that the German ministries have ruled out maintaining nuclear power plants. But that doesn't stop them from claiming difference. And all the media seems to be going all out and using it as evidence that there's a renaissance. But they're doing it because there's power plant in Ukraine being held as a human hostage. If you disconnect the exterior power, which you need for the backup generators to start, what do you think is going to happen 50 minutes later? Now only 3 nuclear plants are operational and they're scheduled to be closed by December, and it's not going to happen. Well, it is. But there is no doubt that the government is under huge public pressure for a nuclear pause, which they're not. And what is more, on the question of whether Germany should build new nuclear power plants, well, because of the energy crisis caused by refusing to do business, the inflicted economic inflation on all NATO countries and United Nations countries. And that only affects the most impoverished. But I mean, prices for just gas are astronomical. People can't afford to pick up their children anymore. And what is more, on the question of whether Germany should build nuclear power plants because of the energy crisis, 41% of the respondents answered yes. Like, if you believe that their polls, you're insane. And I know that people that follow this program generally wouldn't. But the people that actually think this media exists, I wish I could be like them. living that blinders on and not realizing you can't go back, right? Once you understand the big picture, you wouldn't want to. Why would you? The truth is much more helpful, meaning thereby that they favor an approach that isn't even up for debate in Germany. Berlin refuses to extend the life of its last nuclear reactor. Another headline from the day. But the media is just every day, and I usually don't cover it because there's so much of that. You can do a show every day now for 11 years you want, just on people attacking Germany for telling nuclear to piss off. The Dutch government is moving towards the construction of 2 nuclear plants. Whoopie freaking do. Who are they going to get to build it? To war-induced energy shortages. Again, Germany only provides 10% of the fuel. So how can we have this big of a discrepancy and disparage in prices for North America, 10%? So you shouldn't... France derives 70% of electricity from nuclear energy. In your dreams, half the fleet is shut down because of corrosion. You ain't opening that back up for 4 or 5 years if you're lucky. And 6 other plants are down from severe droughts. And then exemptions were given to the rest of the nuclear power plants. They built all their reactors at the same time. And then at the very last moment, they say they're going to have a renaissance. Same thing with France or Britain. Britain's going to build a bunch of reactors, 1 a year. But Britain doesn't build reactors. France does. And France can't keep what it got running. It's 100% fable. France is even building a nuclear plant for the United Kingdom. That's a far cry from the truth. That answer won't come up till next week. Crystal balls. Last month, London gave consent for the plan. Yeah, and then Boris Johnson also lifted all restrictions on food from a nuclear wasteland in Japan from 14 prefectures. By the way, England was importing baby food 3 years ago from Fukushima Prefecture with no restrictions. They hate your guts. The nuclear industry hates you with a passion. Everybody on the planet, every species. Britain hopes the new nuke plant will help bolster its pledge to be more energy independent. Whoever wrote this shit gets slapped every day when they wake up. Because the Russian-Ukraine conflict sent gas prices soaring. No, a handful of people in your government decided to, not through a referendum, but on their own, called an embargo, and that caused inflation in your country to wreck your country. A handful of scumbags in your government wrecked your country's and impoverish the impoverished even more. Just a handful of people, less than a handful of people, each country, made that decision. Not Parliament, not Congress. Private investors and government agencies in America said to be pouring billions in the next generation nuclear designs. They're not said to be, they are. They're wasting billions into reactors that won't be marketable for at least 30 years. If you took that energy, that monetary, and invested in storage for the renewables, problem solved. Because that's what you got to do at some point, right? Canada done it last year, right? They said, well, here's $4 billion. Bruce Power says, we'll take that. Renewables are not getting that. If you give renewables energy storage, nuclear is dead. So Bruce Power nuclear plant is going to have pumped hydro storage for a nuclear power plant. Try wrapping your minds around that one. They're stupid. And then, well, there's nuclear, then there's stupid. West Virginia recently repealed its decades-long ban on nuclear power for that purpose. Well, there's 38 states that don't have a ban on nuclear power, but they're not jumping on board. Bill Gates, how is that evidence of a renaissance? Talking about TerraPower is dependent upon Russia's fuel, for God's sakes. Russia ain't going to give it to them. And this is a pipe dream. They don't exist. These small modular reactors or mini modular reactors, these small reactors don't exist. They've been trying this for like 50 years. It's meant to distract you away, right? To take the money away from renewables so that you can have a future. If you took just 10% of the money they're burning on the nuclear industry and the government and applied it to storage, like compressed air storage or pond batteries, where you just dam off a valley and you fill up water and boat of it and you pump water up with excess energy, and when you need it, you release it from the top one. You do it anywhere. You can dig big tunnels and compress air down there. But you're gonna wait for 30 years for something that probably won't even exist, because renewables have stomped the guts out of all of those. By 2026, between 2020 and 2026, renewables would be 4,800 gigawatts of new renewable energy online, which is equal to more energy than all gas, oil, and coal plants and nuclear plants combined. Do you think it's just going to stop at 2026? Which is, that's 4,800 gigawatts is equal to 5,500 large reactors, of renewable energy in just 6 years, which is more than energy than currently exists as gas, oil, coal, and nuclear combined. So therefore, by 2028, 2030, it's going to be double that and triple that, because of the way renewables, capacities, and everything else, right? And who knows which new invention is going to show up, right? Geothermal, of course. You can tap into geothermal anywhere on the planet if you wanted to spend the money. Go right down under any nuclear plant, tap into geothermal, get rid of the nuclear. Keep the infrastructure and the wires connected, and just spin the turbines with geothermal instead of nuclear, or do that to a gas, oil, coal plants. The majority of them are good to go if you wanted to go ahead and do it. The geothermal is just dig deep enough and you're going to tap into 1,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. Guaranteed for life. And at NuScale, a company that created the first commercially small reactor design that got a stamp from the non-regulatory agencies. That's not evidence. That's desperation. That's pathetic. That's just pathetic, is what they're trying to do to you. 2 reactors at Plant Vogue in Georgia are slated to open in 2023. after a 6-year delay, it's 4 times the original price estimated on top of that. That's the only 2 reactors to be built in decades in the country. You're going to call that a nuclear renaissance, are you? You people are incredibly, unbelievably, not really, but you're pathetic. It's not unbelievable if you look at this. But the problem is the industry is so dangerous. It's so hateful. In Asia, newly elected leaders of the Philippines, why would you want to infest their little country with nuclear, you scumbags? Japan and South Korea, empowered by shifting public opinions because of high energy prices because of Ukraine and Russia. Thank you, Kevin. I was trying to figure out this system because some of that money goes to Google, right? And I can't keep doing it, but I don't know. You can't have that and do the other stuff too, right? Thank you, Kevin. I just don't know. War in Ukraine it takes you a month to get it right. I appreciate it, though. Don't get me wrong. War in Ukraine has dramatically revived global nuclear industry, but it hasn't. According to the World Nuclear Association's Director General Sama. Now, this lady, is revolting. She would murder everything so she can get a big paycheck each week. 2 factors, and she tells lies constantly about the effects of radiation, right? Sama, rather. Like the World Nuclear Association Director and World WORLD, and they see nuclear worldwide as just them, right? And that they are above reproach. They are better than every creature on the planet, particularly humans. Humans are puny. You're just a human. If you're not in the nuclear industry, you're basically a scumbag. That's how they see you. 2 factors oblivious have helped the resurgence of... There is no resurgence of nuclear power. Like, nuclear is not even replacing what's being lost each year. But the way they drop these stories, the people that write the story are clearly insane. They're clear, like, if that's your job to cook up this nonsense, this propaganda, and it's 100% propaganda. Can you imagine how dangerous these people actually are in real life? Right? If there's children missing in each of those communities, and the people that write this stuff, because you can't be that evil and not be a child molester too. Demand for advanced nuclear reactors will be worth $1 trillion globally, but there will be no demand because renewables are on a trajectory that can't be stopped. Yeah, I mean, you can cause disruption, but you can't stop it. And that all you're doing is just destroying the planet for your paycheck each week. And you all work together like one big stupid machine. Using the word net zero, that's... When people use the word net zero, which was Miles Allen's paper, and then it was utilized to bludgeon the planet with since he wrote the paper. Nuclear accident anywhere has the potential to upset the momentum that the nuclear industry has had for decades. The nuclear industry has not had momentum for decades. Like the amount of lies in the story is surreal. The war in Ukraine, which provided the momentum. Yeah, originally, right, Russia invaded Chernobyl, and the whole world was like freaked out. The nuclear industry, public relation firms, which is the media worldwide, went into a salvage mode of the nuclear industry and created this bizarre freaking fantasy that we've been now dealing with for over 4 months straight. This freak of nature machine. These people are getting paid a paycheck to come out and dress nuclear up each day. It's a very persistent thing. It's a very frightening because of the delusions that they propagate. There's nothing like it. We've never seen nothing like it in the media. Media is pretty disgusting, but when it comes to nuclear, it's at the very top of evil. Nobody in the industry has a single redeeming quality. They don't have a single spokesperson for the industry that's recognizable worldwide as almost human. They don't have a single person. And Sama is certainly not one of them, even though she's meant to be, right? But the war in Ukraine was used as a war against humanity. And so nuclear is obviously playing a huge part in this equation. And therefore, it needs to be hunted down and stomped like a cockroach. May take that away too if the fears over shelling last week around a massive Ukrainian captured nuclear power plant, Europe's largest, has been under Russian control since March, proved to be true. And that will be a big irony, the author and veteran journalist, aka lawyer, has been commenting on politics, foreign policies, and strategic affairs for 30 decades. But does that make them right? Just because they've been commenting for a political agenda. A former national fellow of the Indian Council for Historical Research and recipient of the Seoul Peace Prize Scholarship. And is a distinguished fellow at the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies. It's frightening. That's frightening. And he wrote a very, very, very complicated article full of lies and deceit and deception. So is that what these institutions are meant for, is to promote the best liars and deceivers and manipulators? It is, right? Anyway, on to the next one, because it never stops, does it? Europe's largest nuclear plant is under threat, but experts says a Chernobyl-sized disaster is unlikely. So what they're saying is Chernobyl is worse than Fukushima, right? Which is absurdness, of course. But that has been the steady for 11 years. Well, it ain't no Chernobyl. Oh, it's from CNN, so it really doesn't. It actually doesn't mean anything. It's from CNN, Dana. I'll show you what CNN is actually like and why that should concern you. Let's put it that way. If I can find it. It isn't it. We're looking for it. Oh, your bad luck. I found it. There's a whole lot of these its, by the way. Here's CNN's version. This is Anna Corbin, I think it is. Yeah, Anna Corbin there. She's going to pretend she's in the building 100 feet above the wreckage there and everything is perfect. On TV.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011. leading to the country's worst nuclear disaster.
So, does anybody think that she's inside the reactor building that doesn't exist? Or am I just being picky? Because all of our compatriots actually pretend they're in the same building. She's not alone.
We are here inside reactor.
The threat of a nuclear calamity has hung for months over Russia's war in Ukraine. Those fears were renewed last week after shelling intensified around a massive Ukrainian nuclear power plant, Europe's largest, which has been under the Ruskies' control since March. Well, since first it took Chernobyl. Russia accused Ukraine of planting a false flag. So false flag is where you attack yourself and blame it on your enemy. You know, like 911, like 3 Mile Island. I'm sorry, like, hang on. I actually put a little video together to articulate that, for what a false flag is. He actually explains history's false flag. I decided to put in the pictures to help tell the story. This is, my God, I can't remember his name. Now I know I've finally lost my mind.
I frankly think that crisis initiation is really tough. And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran.
It's very hard to see how the president can get us to war.
Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall he had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until the until the Maine exploded. And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked, which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. So if, in fact, the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war.
Like, he starts off, it's hard to see how this president can get us to war with Iran. So it would be best if somebody else started the war. But after he articulated history's false flags, each war in history, including 911, was a false flag. They attacked themselves. Europe's largest nuclear plant is under threat, and experts say a Chernobyl-sized disaster is unlikely. It could be as big as Fukushima, but not Chernobyl. So you know you're living in a bizarre world when you hear a story like that. You're actually living in the Twilight Zone. Experts are keen to diffuse some of the more alarmist warnings. Explaining the main threat is closest to the plant from radioactive fallout and doesn't justify a Europe-wide alert of radioactive fallout. Well, this is absurdness to suggest that the radiation is contained to just the localized area. Let me show you France's model of radioactive fallout over 16 days from Fukushima. This is 16 days. Now, I tweeted this to the journalist that I showed you the model from earlier, by the way, with my Twitter account. But this is 16 days of radioactive fallout covering the entire planet. So there's justification for sure. It's not alarmist at all. Experts are particularly wary of any comparison to Chernobyl, a repeat of which is incredibly unlikely, they claimed. Now, I showed you a CNN reporter pretending they're on top of a building at Fukushima that doesn't even exist. said it's not likely that the plant will be damaged. The president of the European Nuclear Society, who obviously should be fired and probably burnt alive if that's legal down there, which is probably not. In the very unlikely case that it is, burning them alive? No. That the radioactive problem would mainly affect Ukrainians that live nearby. Would mainly only affect the locals, eh? Rather than spreading throughout Eastern Europe. That was the case with Chernobyl. As if Fukushima doesn't exist. If we use past experience, Fukushima could be a comparison of the worst case scenario, but not Chernobyl. Claiming that Chernobyl is worse than Fukushima, folks. I explained to you earlier why that's a ludicrous assertion. It's completely ludicrous. Each of Fukushima reactors are 720 tons, not counting the fuel pools. Chernobyl was 200 tons. Referring to the serious but more localized meltdown at the Japanese plant. To the serious but more localized meltdown. I just showed you the model. That's Fukushima fallout model. In 16 days, it covers the entire planet. The radioactive fallout doesn't go away for millions of years, by the way. So they're claiming that's incredible brainwashing, eh? We see it all the time, too. It's very sophisticated. The average journalist is incapable of understanding all these nuances, all these minutiae, the details of the details. It's just completely impossible that they're going to pick up on all of this and just write their story and move on to their cat videos and everything else like they normally do. The most pressing dangers will be faced by the Ukrainians living in the vicinity of the plant. The nuclear industry is very thorough. I give them credit. They're very thorough in covering bases. But it's the same story, right, for 75, 80 years. And by the Ukraine, exact same words, paragraph by paragraph. And by the Ukrainian staff who are still working there. August the 5th, several explosions near the electrical switchboard caused the power shutdown and one reactor was disconnected. United Nations, which shouldn't exist, International Atomic Energy Agency, the degenerates of the degenerates on our planet, aka the IAEA, chief said, the use of an operational power plant for military activities is unconscionable. It's pretty strong words from people that are unconscionable in the first place. Henry Preston, a communications manager, London-based World Nuclear... These are friggin' degenerate scum, by the way. World Nuclear Association. They're absolute degenerates. And cowards, I might add, who've never put their name on their stories or articles. United Nations Secretary of... Yeah, because he's secretary of a corporation, like McDonald's, right? Said electricity was up to a military-industrial complex that hide behind corporate personhood. At the plant belongs to Ukraine. Obviously, the electricity from the power plant in Ukraine, and it's necessary, especially during winter, for the Ukrainian people. And this principle must be respected. But Russia's taking the power and doing what they want with it. That's the story. How secure are the plant's nuclear reactors, says the scumbag. These are not modern nuclear plants. These are 40-odd years old. Modern nuclear plants are extremely well reinforced. These are not modern. From all kinds of attacks, like earthquakes. And the seized plant, I can't pronounce it for the life of me because I didn't bother trying, but I never do try when it's a different language. Modern nuclear plants. The problem is nuclear plants are not designed for war zones. Under plausible circumstances, zombie, all these systems could fail. The plant's 6 reactors, only 2 are currently functioning, are protected by steel and meter-thick cement that is brittle from neutron bombardments from decades, by the way, that are at pressurized reactors at over 1,000 psi. Punch a hole in it, and she goes boom like a car tire. Random shelling cannot really destroy it. All they got to do is cut the external power. And they can destroy it. They can destroy the wiring going in there. Or the wiring that's in there. Or the fuel pools. Got no containment whatsoever. The fuel pools got no containment, zero. They got a little thin roof. That's it. So easy to blow up, it's sickening. If you lose power, she starts melting down about 50 minutes later. Once she heats up to 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperature, she'll drill a hole down in the earth. But typically, once she starts melting down, then you create the hydrogen. The hydrogen builds up, and a spark or oxygen will detonate it. Once it displaces the oxygen and it's just all helium, if you open the door, she'll detonate. Triggering a nuclear meltdown would be the worst case scenario. No, a hydrogen explosion, like we've seen earlier. While it would be disastrous at a local level, really, a nuclear meltdown would be a local level. It wouldn't have a major impact on Europe. Really. That's nonsense. What's the point to media when you can't believe a friggin' sentence that they have? Everything got to be checked before you can believe them. Everything. The main damage here is damage to the system needed to keep the fuel in the reactor cool, external power lines. From 50 miles away and melt down. Because you need those to start up your generators. An attack on structures used to store spent nuclear fuel, and they have multiple fuel pools for each reactor. They have at least 12 fuel pools there. That means they got a common spent fuel pool. And they're going to be laden with decades of reactor cores, each of them. If you melt down one of them, that reactor is going to melt down too. They're not supposed to be running in a nuclear war zone. Stupids. The industry's insane, right? And at the same time, they're saying there's a nuclear renaissance so that this disappears. See? With the potential to release radioactive material in the surrounding areas. Like, you can't claim that releases from the fuel pool are just going to land locally with decades and decades and decades of reactor cores in it. Infinitely more that's in the reactors. And you're going to claim, so what specifically will finally leave the local areas? These people are actually insane. To claim that the radiation, that was a plutonium model from Fukushima covering the planet. But Ukraine radiation doesn't go anywhere. It's trained to stay there like a puppy dog, Dana. The scale of hypothetical nuclear meltdown would also be used for smaller than that of Chernobyl. These reactors, Chernobyl was 200 tons. These are huge reactors. These are pure uranium, pure plutonium. After the Chernobyl, radiation scattered across the northern hemisphere. With 150,000 square kilometers in Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine contaminated, according to the scumbags at the IAEA. The contamination spread as far as 500 kilometers north of the site. I can't take it anymore. Hang on. That's the problem with this story is you can't rush anything about it, right? It's all good. Move that up to it. Hang on. Do that one more time. Oh, that's pretty easy. 500 kilometers, you say? They probably got damaged, got schizophrenia from Chernobyl's fallout, right? But let's cover it anyway. Chernobyl fallout in Austria, birth defects, abortion rates in Austria. What are you talking about that? Birth rates in Europe, sex odds at birth in Europe after Chernobyl. So they allege that Chernobyl radioactive fallout changed the sex ratio of all males and females in Europe. Can't do that without changing the sex ratio of all the species too, by the way. Prenatal loss of 400 male fetuses in the Czech Republic. Secondary sex ratio trends around just nuclear facilities in France and Germany. So you can't do that without poisoning everybody. That's how you change the sex ratio, which is more males than females, which means less population on the planet. Non-thyroid cancers in northern Ukraine post-Chernobyl. Let me see. Congenital abnormalities. Fallout from Chernobyl. Cancers in Finland. Belarus. Down syndrome time clusters in January from Chernobyl. So not just cancers, all kinds of heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline. Chernobyl fallout, prenatal mortality in England and Wales. They actually closed 9,000 farms in Ireland and Scotland, United Kingdom. Let me see. There we go. Saying 500 kilometers, you just want to go slap somebody, right? Chernobyl, they closed 9,000. It was actually 9,460 farms. 400 are still closed today. 380. 3,000 miles away. So claiming that it only had effects for 500 miles at the worst case scenario, you can't. Latvia can't eat the reindeer even today because of radioactive fallout. Abortion rates in Austria because of Chernobyl. Effective lifetime doses to hunters and their families in Sweden after Chernobyl. Piece of shit, Geraldine Thomas. Legal abortions in Sweden after Chernobyl. Legally induced abortions in Denmark. Pregnancy outcomes in Finland after Chernobyl. Delayed effects of accidental radiation exposure, 15 years of follow-up after Chernobyl. Norway, early infant mortalities in Germany, trends in birth and sex ratio of research reactors, human sex ratio at birth and residential proximity, nuclear facilities in France. Global implications of Chernobyl. They say weapons fallout changed the sex ratio of all species worldwide. Schizophrenia after Chernobyl. Back to Astro. Experts instead suggest a feasible worst case would look more like another more recent disaster, Fukushima. Evacuation may be required for tens of kilometers. In the middle of a war, these would be exceptionally dangerous. Any radioactive fallout would spread 10 or 20 kilometers before it would cease to pose a risk. Really? That's Fukushima, 16 days of fallout. Imagine how bad it actually is at ground zero. They're still hemorrhaging into the environment. Look at this statement here. With distances, delusion happens. So very soon the delusion becomes sufficient in that the impact becomes not very serious for the environment and for people's health. So the people that write the story are typically like the World Nuclear Association, groups like, or lobbying groups like that. They're prolific, mind you, but and most of it comes from the same places worldwide. Nuclear power might not be dead in California. Just freaking out over a single nuclear plant. They're going to take one. The government's going to give them $1.4 billion. Loan them, right? That'll turn into a forgivable loan, of course, because they can't pay it back. All nuclear power plants need 2 external power plants just to run. And claiming a nuclear plant doesn't generate greenhouse gas, all the fuel pools are hemorrhaging radiation. They're all splitting the atoms that normally power millions and millions and millions of homes. You take the reactor out and you put it in the pool, it's still producing the same atoms all day, every day. They are saturated into the special water. Then that's boiled off up those tall, skinny stacks 24 hours a day. Around 120,000 liters. It's probably triple that, but at least 120,000 liters a day. And once it boils off up the stack, now you liberate the radiation. Most nuclear plants are surrounded by farms because they love you so much. The state is focused on maintaining energy reliability while accelerating efforts to combat climate change. If someone said that to my face, I'd probably beat them up. Well, really, all you do is go boo, and they'll defecate all over themselves. The risk of falling short of our climate goals, again, what kind of talk is this? Exceeds the risk of including nuclear energy as part of the zero carbon energy mix. Isn't that scary as shit when they say the word zero carbon? That's frightening. That's frightening. What's frightening is when you look up where they get all of that too, right? I'll walk you through it. Or I won't. I screwed it up today. Let's try this again. There we go. That looks a little better. Back to that feller. Okay, so here's what they're beating the entire planet up. You got the father of global warming. He wrote a paper, and now everybody suffers. Miles Allen, he wrote a paper. He's the physicist behind net zero. BP Oil came up with carbon footprint. The cover accident it had, it blamed everything on you. And United Nations was like, perfect. We're going to use this to bludgeon the entire planet. How do you bring down your carbon footprint? A biological weapon. The idea of a personal carbon footprint was popularized by a large advertising campaign of the fossil fuel company BP. It wasn't a large advertising campaign. It was a massive advertising campaign. And now the word carbon-free is everybody's worst nightmare. There's your carbon-free lot. Now you got the father of global warming, James Edward Hansen from NASA, also known as a freak. He is best known for climatology. In 1988, he gave a testimony that nobody on the planet can now escape on climate change. Right from NASA, James from NASA. Hansen said he was 99% confident it was caused by the accumulation of greenhouse gases. So that's where the greenhouse gases come from. James Hansen. His testimony was pivotal turning point in the history of global climate change and marked the official beginning of the global climate change warming policy debate, which meant taxes for everything you do, right? So those four entities are the reason why you can't have a future and why all species are being exterminated. We know from disasters like Chernobyl, Fukushima, that an accident in a nuclear power plant can be devastating, but nuclear still causes far fewer deaths than coal, gas, and oil. And Hansen had wrote a paper on coal, gas, and oil deaths. And he estimated that nuclear saved 60,000 a year. The industry is blown that out of proportion, claims now 8-9 million people a year die from coal, oil, and gas. That was just a couple of years ago they changed the narrative. The die-offs are caused by 80 decades of releases into the environment of emitters that never can't be extinguished. Pulses energy at the speed of light every second, almost the speed of light. And when they hit each other, they change direction. That's known as an X-ray effect. And it sterilizes all the species in increments over time. It kills the bacteria and the fungus in the forest. The forest don't break down. The litter, the foliage doesn't break down because it doesn't have the basis of fungus and bacteria anymore, which supports the ecosystem, right? No species can survive without fungus and bacteria. We have to incorporate nuclear energy in a way that acknowledges it's not risk-free. Jason Bordoff, who we covered him lots, co-founding dean of Columbia Climate School. You know, he's a winner. We'd love to hear from you. Not. Well, you just heard from me, I hope. Sustainable investors welcome EU move to reclassify nuclear energy as green, which and nuclear energy, of course, is the most dirty energy in human history. Have we got a poll tonight, by the way? Is nuclear energy capable of dumping, nuclear industry capable of dumping radioactive water and faking the Fukushima nuclear holding tanks? Well, the tanks would be 1.4 sieverts per hour of just beta if you filled them up. You can't get back on the site to build another tank for starters. And you can fill up all the tanks 6 times a day with a typical water from a nuclear power plant, which each reactor is 4,500 tons a minute. 1,440 minutes a day. Sustainable investors welcome. This is absurdness again. Because nuclear is the most carbon-intensive thing, period, of all energy sources. And, of course, no plants can survive without carbon, by the way. If there's no carbon, the planet would be completely naked. There wouldn't be any species on it. Ukraine is using toxic agents against the Russians' military. When we finished last week, we finished this on Thursday, we were covering stories about snipers, Ukrainian snipers targeting Russians at the nuclear power plant. Now they're using toxic agents against the Russian military at the nuclear power plant. So it's not hard to imagine this escalating into a major event, into a major release. Because soldiers will only put up with so much before they'll just go nutty, because they have it at their fingertips. The Russian army forces have been subject to numerous attacks committed by chemical terrorism. So they got snipers picking them off. They're using chemical weapons on them. The plant is being used as a human shield, where they're firing depleted uranium munitions from the site into the surrounding community. How do you evacuate it if you have a nuclear event there? The whole industry is insane. I'm not putting up with it. The Russian defense minister is considering the shelling of the power plant by Ukraine forces an act of nuclear terrorism. What I see, there is no Ukrainian forces, there's civilians with NATO weapons, right? What you're seeing, though, is realistically is a nuclear meltdown about to happen. It's hard to imagine it doesn't. It could have happened already. It most likely has, and they've covered it up. Under a UN convention, which is... This is a disgusting organization, United Nations. It's despicable. They shouldn't exist. They've now infiltrated, like a parasite, most facets of our lives worldwide. They're setting policies in our countries when they have no sovereignty over it. And people should be worried sick about that statement. The official says that if an accident was to happen, which it probably already has, the shelling could potentially cause the effects could surpass the scale of Chernobyl and Fukushima. It's pretty hard to beat Fukushima, baby. 5 reactors and a common spent fuel pool, and 8 to 10 fuel pools atomized and aerosoled into the environment. It's a catastrophic amount of radiation that has now caused an extinction event on our planet. If you look at the beginning of my last video, I covered that enough that the average person not aware of it will pick up on it pretty good. If they got an open mind, the entire territories of Ukraine would be contaminated by nuclear waste. Well, it covers the whole planet. Nuclear waste ravaged their land. Quite a lot of native communities have been just destroyed by Hanford nuclear site. What Hanford done for the first few decades, there's not an appropriate name for it besides criminal. Wickedly evil doesn't really do it justice. The Columbia River flows all the way to the Pacific, by the way, to Puget Sound. Flows next to a decommissioned nuclear production complex in Washington State. And we covered a similar story to this on the last show, or the second last show, rather, on Wednesday's show, about the Navajo pollution, was stunning amount of pollution. Hanford, they estimate they need at least 700 billion more in hundreds of years. It's 585 square miles of nuclear wasteland is what Hanford basically is. It obviously extends far past that. There's a spot on the Columbia River where the estimated was 70 sieverts. 3 sieverts is a lethal dose, right? So if you're drifting past it in your boat fishing, you're going to die within the next couple of weeks. So this is an 80-year-old site, Hanford. And the natives have always been the target of nuclear waste and industrial waste, but particularly nuclear waste, because it lives for millions of years. That's their way of eradicating the natives. I don't know why they hate natives so much, but you see it in every country. It's weaponized against the natives in particular, and everybody else secondarily. And species, of course. During its lifespan, hundreds of billions of gallons were dumped directly into the ground. Not in underground storage tanks are different. They're 1 million gallons each. There's 50 of them, right? Or 58, 56 is it? Now the problem with the tanks back in the day was they were dumping heavy nuclear waste there. After dumping hundreds of billions of gallons directly into the soil. They have 41 miles on top of that of unlined trenches where they dump nuclear waste into it. It's illegal to have unlined trenches at the dump at Hanford, but they dump the nuclear waste in the 41 miles. And that was later, right? After hundreds of billions of gallons dumped directly into the soil during weapons production. It's just the whole story is just incredibly heartbreaking. Calling it evil is, again, is lowballing how monstrous this industry actually is. British lawmaker, nuclear action could draw NATO allies into a war. NATO will nuke Russia if they cause a nuclear accident. NATO is not supposed to exist. It was created in response to the Soviet Union. Conservative British members of Parliament, who chairs the House of Commons Defence Select Committee, these are just zombies, right? Cautioned that any nuclear accident at the Ukraine captured nuclear plant could draw NATO into a war between Russia and Ukraine. Well, NATO can't go to war without United Nations saying they can, which means 195 militaries, not 30, are in that war. So let's make it clear now that any deliberate damage causing potential radiation leak to the Ukrainian nuclear reactor would be a breach of the NATO Article 5, which is not supposed to exist because NATO is only supposed to exist as a counter to the Soviet Union. And now it's weaponized against all species in the planet. But I didn't know Ukraine was part of NATO. Or they would be at war now if they were, right? So to say the radioactive fallout landing in NATO countries would be an act of war. And Russia's plotting a false flag attack. And I explained that earlier, what false flags are all about. He warned French citizens that the resulting energy economic crisis confronting Europe is not over, calling it the price of our freedom and our values. Really? You're making 150, 200,000 a year. You're not worried about gas rising. You're not sacrificing anything. Like, you're appointed, not elected on top of that. And you're willing to go to war and destroy everybody's paycheck forever. People like this are extraordinarily stupid and dangerous, and that's a terrible combination. There's growing concern in Europe that shelling around the captured nuclear plant could result in a catastrophe worse than Chernobyl. Again, right, they're implying that Chernobyl is worse than Fukushima, which is a ludicrous assertion. It's absurd. Japan's nuclear research agency to export domestically useless uranium ore, which is not domestically useless if it's refined, but they don't have a refinement plant, thank goodness. Ukraine, we take a nuclear attack over being a part of Russia. So Ukraine is willing, and I suggested Ukraine should surrender originally, right? And everybody attacked me. But the reason behind it was that they couldn't defeat Russia. And that Russia would willingly level the entire country so they can have a nice highway. Nice parking lots. And that's what we see, right? And destroy 50 million people's life. And it's the same thing as what happened in the Soviet Union, where you dissolve the country, you dissolve the pensions of the country and the patents of the country, and you only impoverish the most impoverished. And in this case, you destroy the whole country. According to the United Nations, which is just a corporation that has absurd amount of influence in 195 countries, that is criminal. It's 100% criminal that this organization, and it's an organization of evil. We don't see any redeeming qualities in it. It displaced at least 12 million Ukrainians already. It's infinitely more than that, obviously. They're getting your information from the United Nations. You're not getting information. You're getting that propaganda machine. Huge parts of the east and the south of the country are flattened. It's just war till the end. Ultra-safe nuclear. What a despicable name for a company. What a disgusting name for a company. What a revolting name for a company. What a hideous, cowardly betrayal of a name for a company with like nuclear. There's no such thing as ultra-safe nuclear. And that they're a facility for fuel manufacturing in a nuclear wasteland known as Oak Ridge. And look at the scum stood up there. These are scumbags, right? They do this for a paycheck. They'll kill the whole planet to keep their job. 3D printing process for nuclear reactors from Oak Ridge Nuclear Wasteland National Laboratories. The lot at Oak Ridge, they're barely human, right? They have more people with cancer than they do without cancer. Get the politicians down there. Politicians do a little dance. Throw some money around. This is a private company. Why are politicians hanging out there? Look at these lots. Look at these two people. I know the guy on the left is stable. Stable like an earthquake. The guy on the right scares me too. In fact, the guy on the left, I can hear children going, "Mommy, that man scares me." The Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Energy at the Department of Energy. Can you imagine how freaking brainwashed that one is? Can you imagine how bizarre that world she lives in is? Like, you can't. These people that are in these positions are literally the most dysfunctional people you'll ever come across. They're completely warped in their view of the world. Transform this nation into a factory fighting the calamity of climate change. We transformed this nation into a factory fighting the calamity of climate change. When nuclear is climate change. Invisible plumes covering the planet, pulsing energy every second, almost at the speed of light. This is the American government radioactive fallout model based on 40 days, and then I speed the model up 200%. This projection is based upon emissions from venting, not from the actual inventories that were lost. Anyway, ultra-safe nuclear. We've covered them tons of times. It's such a betrayal to name a company ultra-safe when nuclear can't be safe. And it'll never be ultra-safe. But it shows you how childlike they actually are in real life, that they would name their company like that. Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, was warned by former KGB spy, which is who Vladimir Putin was. His parents worked for Stalin. One was his dad was a military, his mom was a nurse. So he was disconnected at birth from reality, see? That launching a nuke will be his death sentence. The British media are just like scary, how twisted and coordinated they actually are. Ukraine News Live, evil Vladimir Putin launches sick rocket attack on a busy town located next to a nuclear power plant. The British media they're strictly about brainwashing, and brainwashing is to get you to support the military-industrial complex, support NATO, and support the United Nations. That's pretty well all the media does worldwide, is demand that you support those entities. And they are where they go to get all their documentation, and they'll put that there so that you can't. If you read the media regularly, you end up, if you're not familiar with how it works, you'll end up getting drawn into the brainwashing. That's what it's all about, right? State-run Energon Atom manages all 4 Ukrainian nuclear energy generators. They're nuclear power plant scumbag. They said that it's possible the missile was aimed specifically at another nuclear power plant. And they show you that picture too. Look at that. Oh, that was a different story. With the same, no, that's the same story. We already covered it. They got a $330 billion fine on top of everything else. But the executives, the 4 TEPCO executives, they got to pay $90 billion that they don't have to TEPCO. A TEPCO gets a $330 billion fine. And TEPCO's on the public stock market. It was nationalized by the Japanese government immediately because it went bankrupt. But because it's on the stock market, they're required to take it over, which was an illegal amendment to the slavery law originally that ended up being used in the Magna Carta. In doctrines in most countries eventually. Operator, Tokyo Electric Power Company took the rap, not the nuclear industry, who was responsible, not the people who owned the reactor originally, built it originally. No, the operator, the company that bought it. So it's like you buy a Chevy car, turns out Chevy car's got a bad brake. And so now you're responsible, it's your fault that 30 million Chevy cars got to go to the factory to get, or back to the shop to get repaired, not the company that makes them. No, because you bought one, so it's your responsibility, see? It's absurd. TEPCO took the rap for the disaster, for multiple nuclear meltdowns that have destroyed the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean, poisoned the entire planet with radioactive fallout. This is what we mean, right? So the nuclear industry is not responsible. No. The people that bought their junk are responsible. Nuclear power markets boom. This is market site, but nuclear power market is not booming across the globe, right? But they're trying to get investors to throw their money at the industry to rob them of their life savings. Russia-U.S. confrontation will impose global starvation. This is based upon a study by 3 guys that claimed that a nuclear war would cause all kinds of soot into the upper atmosphere, would block out the sun, right? But we've had nuclear wars. We call it nuclear testing. It's the same weapons with the same emissions and the same like the biggest Soviet Union was equal to 3,800 Hiroshima bombs going off at the same time. So if we set off 3,800 Hiroshima bombs, that's actually considered a nuclear war. But if we set it off as testing, it's not considered a nuclear war. Well, it's still the same thing as a nuclear war. It just wasn't called. You just blew yourself up instead of waiting for somebody else. Australia, at least the British went to Australia and blew that up and covered it with radiation. The British used to wait for the winds to blow across Australia before they set off the nuclear weapons at Maralinga, Montebello. Nuclear fallout shelter sign. How many did they used to have? How many of them did they have? I can't remember. I think it's there somewhere. This is propaganda anyway, right? Even a small-scale war. Well, like, if you look at Castle Bravo in the Bikini Atolls, that was equal to 1,000 Hiroshima plus Nagasaki bombs going off at the same time. That's a nuclear war, no matter how you try to spin it. And it was, because there's 1 million square kilometers of the Bikini Atolls is too radioactive to live in. When in doubt, just keep telling lies is what we seem to see from nuclear industry, right? Enviro Mythbuster. Nuclear power advocates and opponents have been arguing over these 4 words since September the 16th, 1954, when the speech in the assemblies was too cheap to meter, right? Said it's not too much to expect that our children will enjoy in their homes electrical energy too cheap to meter. We'll know of great periodic regional famines only as a matter of history, and will travel effortlessly over the seas and under them and through the air with a minimum of danger and at great speeds, and will experience a lifespan far longer than ours as disease yields and man comes to understand what causes them to age. This is the forecast for an age of peace. But here's the problem. The anti-nukes insist that Strauss was referring to fission energy. And the pro-nuclears insist that Strauss was referring to a world driven by fusion energy, the one we still haven't achieved. It was taken by the industry and weaponized. And you can claim that it wasn't, but it was, because that evidence is overwhelming. The TVA is dumping a mountain of coal ash in black southern Memphis. We see that a lot. And Western number. There was nothing the residents could do to stop it. Always, yeah, the colored communities have been disproportionately, well, almost exclusively saddled with the waste. We've covered a whole lot of stories, and so there can be no... So the dump trucks have sealed cabs for the drivers, and they'll make about 240 trips per day to remove 3.2 million cubic meters, and they're open trucks. So they're driving through these communities, releasing all kinds of harmful coal into the community. Excessive industrial pollution in the black, indigenous, and Latino communities across the country is pervasive. And that's a fact, and we've covered it many friggin' times. We've covered it I don't know how many times.